Good morning. I want to talk today about the aftermath of the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. Perhaps things I expected and then things I observed. So let me see if I can share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, I just need to get rid of a few panels here so that I can see what's going on. And I think we're ready. So yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the aftermath of the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. Now, there were some groups who thought this was going to be the end of the world, so I started calling it the April 8th Apoceclipse. Fortunately, things did not turn out as badly as some people expected. But there's a lot of stuff going on in this eclipse. It's a very strong, very powerful eclipse. And one reason it was so powerful was because we had sun, moon, and Chiron all exactly conjunct at 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. Now, a lot of people associate Chiron with wounding and healing, but what it really is a drive to transcend the world that we see. This small planet Chiron, its orbit is, excuse me, got to clear my throat a few times here. Its orbit is between Saturn and Uranus, and sometimes it goes inside the orbit of Saturn and sometimes outside the orbit of Uranus. The planets, Sun through Saturn, are planets we can see in the nighttime sky. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto we can't see with just our eyes. So they're the invisible planets for us. And Chiron is a bridge between the invisible, between the visible and the invisible. As such, Chiron is this drive inside of us to go beyond what we can readily see. It's that voice inside of us that says there must be something more than this, something more than the reality we see, and it urges us to go beyond. But in the process of doing that, these hard shells that we've erected around us, they often have to be cracked before the light can come in or before our inner light can go out. And that's where the wounding from Chiron comes in, which then has to be followed by healing. But the true nature of Chiron is it's this very sweet, transcendent energy. It feels good. So that's one of the things going on. And so there's this possibility of a lot of wounding occurring. But at the time of the eclipse, as I was watching things on TV, some of the words that people who experienced the eclipse used to describe it were things like happy, awe, united, spiritual, connected, overwhelmed. These are all positive. These all represent the sweet side of Chiron. So far, it looks like we're getting more of the sweet side than the wounding side. And when you have millions of people simultaneously feeling happy, feeling united, feeling spiritual and connected with everything, that is going to make a positive impact. Now, a lot of this Chiron energy, it's going to continue and endure for quite a while. And some people are going to find themselves perhaps permanently changed for the better as a result of that energy. However, there will probably be others who, having initially felt these very expansive feelings of connection and oneness related to Chiron, uh, some of those the next day will be a little scared, perhaps, of what they've experienced. It will be maybe too much opening up too fast. And in response, they may contract and feel some fear and anxiety. So some people may be wounded in that way. Hopefully not very many. And there are some individuals and some countries that are definitely being wounded at this time. But overall, so far, things could change, but overall, it looks like the outcome of this eclipse is going to be more positive than negative. And that is a very good sign for the future. It suggests that humanity has evolved to some extent. And so let us all hope so. Now, some other things going on in this eclipse were that we had a very strong conjunction of Mars and Saturn. This became exact on April 10th, just 2 days later. And there's a couple of ways in which this could work out. Mars and Saturn are traditionally considered malefics in a chart. A lot of the things we don't like to happen are often related to these two planets. Mars is aggression, Saturn is restriction, regulation. When you put them together, there could be a lot of frustration, which then explodes as increased violence. And that is what we hope doesn't happen. Another way, however, that Saturn conjunct Mars can work out is Saturn could regulate and restrict the level of violence. So while there may be this urge for violence, there's also an urge to control it, and that could keep things from getting out of control. And in many respects, we seem to be getting that so far up to this date, at least. So again, that is kind of a good sign. We also have Pluto now in Aquarius, which is ushering in a new couple of decades of technological advancement and transformation. And it's making a pretty nice sextile to Neptune and Venus down here. And so that is bringing in some more pleasant, better coordinated energies into the planet. Also helping with technology is we have Jupiter pretty strongly conjunct Uranus. This conjunction will be exact on April 20th. And with Uranus representing creativity and innovation, Jupiter expansion, this is assisting Pluto in Aquarius to bring all sorts of new technologies online, which will help with economic growth. Okay, so there's potential for wounding, still potential for wounding out there, but we're getting some good things so far from this eclipse. Furthermore, Chiron, right now you can see it's in between Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, Uranus. It's going to stay close to the midpoint between planets over here in Pisces and planets over here in Taurus for quite a while. And that means that this Chiron energy, this drive toward transcendence, which sometimes, oftentimes manifests or results in wounding, that is going to be front and center for some months to come. Okay. Now, this is a pretty nice chart. You might want to pause and look at or take a screenshot. I'm basically trying to show some conjunctions and sign changes that are occurring throughout the 20s. I don't have all of them here, I'm sure, but I have a lot of the important ones. I show when things start, when certain things retrograde, and the first indication that the cycle has finished. And then I have the length of the cycle over here for reference. Now, a lot of these planets will be conjunct a sign or another planet, move retrograde a few times. They may get to the next conjunction or get to the next sign, but then there may be some additional movements forward and movements backward. So the time when a planet becomes firmly established in another sign, it may be a little bit later than the date I have here, but I try and take the first time it occurs as my finishing date. And the 2020s began with a very powerful conjunction, Saturn conjunct Pluto, right after an eclipse. And this pretty much signaled the real start of the COVID pandemic. And this cycle lasts about over 33 years. We also had Jupiter and Saturn conjunct at the end of 2020. That's roughly a 20-year cycle. But this one was extremely important because it represented this conjunction uh, shifting from earth signs, where it had been for about 200 years, into air signs, where it will be for, I think, about the next actually 300 years. So this is a shift from materiality to a world of ideas, creativity, and relationships with one another. We had Jupiter conjunct Chiron on March 11th of 2023. That always brings in the sweet side of Chiron into the planet, more transcendent things, things that endure. And some things have happened under past Jupiter Chiron conjunctions are the perfection of television, the United Nations being formed, the Beatles coming together, uh, the filming of Star Wars beginning, um, J.K. Rowling getting her idea for the Harry Potter series, uh, the uh, humanitarian concerns of President Obama and the creation of Obamacare in this country. All things which are transcendent and which endure. And let's see, right after this conjunction, the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which illustrates a new kind of spiritual warrior and lessons about the multiverse and how to change win-lose situations into win-win situations. The very next day, that swept the Oscars, became one of maybe the most decorated movie in history when you look at all the various other awards it got in addition to the Oscars. And of course, Pluto moving into Aquarius. First time was on March 23rd, 2023. We're doing some retrograde back and forth between Aquarius and Capricorn. We first get into Pisces in 2043. So this is almost a 20-year cycle that we're looking at. Okay. Now, at the end of the 20s, we have some very important conjunctions and sign shifts. Neptune going into Aries, which will be followed by that first happens in 2025. It retrogrades. It happens again in 2026. And shortly thereafter, we have Saturn conjunct Neptune. These are things which historically can affect America and the Soviet, or Russia, no longer the Soviet Union. We have Uranus moving into Gemini in 2025. And let's see, it will retrograde. It looks like maybe back into Taurus, but then goes back into Gemini and pretty much stays there till 2032, about a 7-year cycle. And having Uranus in Gemini, Jupiter conjunct Uranus, that brings a lot of creativity. That's a 14-year cycle. That is all of this is going to lie within this Pluto in Aquarius. So there's going to be a lot of creativity, a lot of revolution of technology, a lot of ideas, shakeups in Russia and America continuing. Saturn conjunct Chiron in 2028. That's when we could get some new forms of spirituality emerging and becoming concrete. And then we also get in 2026 Chiron moving into Taurus. So lots of sign changes, lots of important conjunctions occurring this decade. And around this month, we're going to have a lot of the inner planets forming conjunctions with Chiron. We have 3 conjunctions of Mercury with Chiron, Moon conjunct Chiron, Sun conjunct Chiron, Venus conjunct Chiron. And then right at the end of May, we have Mars conjunct Chiron. These are all going to be like aftershocks to the April 8th solar eclipse where Sun and Moon were conjunct Chiron. We're going to keep getting that Chiron energy being emphasized in the first half of 2024. Now, another thing which is impacting this decade is the Barbo Planetary Cycle Index. This is basically a cumulative measure of how close the outer planets, Jupiter through Pluto, are to one another. When they're very close, their cumulative sum of those distances is small, and that indicates an imbalance in things on planet Earth. We have our planets clustered too closely together, so there's not a lot of different energies at work which can interact with one another. We get too far in one direction rather than one another. And we kind of hit this bottom plateau or bottom valley at the start of 2020. And the late Andre Barbeau had predicted as far back as 2011 that there was a great likelihood of a pandemic and things like war uh, at or near the start of this decade. Okay, now the index stayed in this valley. It reached its absolute low in about March of 2022, not long after Russia invaded Ukraine. So those years from beginning of 2020 through first half of 2022, they're the low point for humanity for this century. Okay, now we're starting to come out of it. So this arrow, which says we're here, it actually should be pointing a little bit higher. We're probably about here where my cursor is right now. So things are getting better. And if you think back to how things were during those first few years of the 2020s, 2020, 2021, 2022, they were characterized by a pandemic, insurrection in America, and war in Ukraine. Terrible things, awful things. But we're starting to come out of it. Things are starting to get better in the world. It'll take time, though. And the second half of this decade holds a lot of promise as technology, innovation, ideas, relationships become what's important in this world. Okay, now these are just a few of the headlines which have followed this eclipse. We've seen some Earth changes, which could be related to the eclipse or to Jupiter conjunct Uranus in Taurus, or both. There was a 7.4 earthquake in Taiwan, a rare 4.8 earthquake in New Jersey. A volcano in Iceland is continuing to spew lava. Mount Etna started blowing smoke rings into the Sicilian sky. That's a rare thing, which I think has happened before, but it's not common. In terms of technology, a man received a pig kidney transplant that so far seems to be working, and that could revolutionize how we treat kidney disease. It could ultimately do away with dialysis. A company called Neuralink implanted a chip in a quadriplegic's brain, and he can now interface with the computer. He can, just by thinking, play some computer games and play chess on the computer. MIT claims they figured out how to make fusion energy practical. That would be wonderful. There's been several reports about breakthroughs in fusion, nuclear fusion. Uh, People haven't made a huge fuss out of it yet, but they keep saying that this could be commercial within 10 years. Nuclear fusion can essentially provide us free, non-polluting energy for the future, and that could solve an awful lot of our problems. Uh, of course, there are also all sorts of headlines about artificial intelligence, some of them disturbing. There was a report in an Israeli newspaper that said that Israel is using artificial intelligence to help pick bombing targets in Gaza. And what was disturbing about this report, if it does turn out to be true, is that it said that uh, people in the military, they're just having artificial intelligence pick these targets, and then they press a button on their computer and bomb those targets without anyone higher up intervening or providing guidance or oversight to what artificial intelligence is saying to do. And this is what people have been afraid of, that in times of war, artificial intelligence uh, might escalate things, send out nuclear bombs, or all sorts of horrible things without any human oversight. So there was, according to this report, no upper level human oversight of these bombing targets that were picked and then bombed. Okay, now Chiron will be within 1 degree of the April 8th eclipse point and reactivating it for about 4 months from about the beginning of November 2024 until the end of 2025. And here are the dates. We first had the eclipse on April 8th. Chiron returns to that same point on November 29th of this year, and then a third time on January 28th of 2025. And as Chiron lingers around that eclipse point, that means that whatever issues or things which are in the news now, these things could come back to prominence during this 4 month period from November 2024 until the end of February 2025. So it ain't over until it's over. For better or worse, this is a very prominent year for Chiron. If you can tune in to the sweeter, the more transcendent side of Chiron, the spiritual side, and if you can integrate that into your life, then you and the world will be better for it. If you can't do that, well, Chiron is still going to be exerting its influence. It's like a slowly rising tide or a slowly moving stream. It may not seem that powerful at any particular moment, but over time, it is going to change things. And this is going to be a big year of change. And if you open yourself up to the sweet, healing, transcendent, larger spiritual dimension of Chiron, then you will be less likely to be wounded and you and the world will be better off. So try and focus on that as a goal for this year. See within yourself if you are feeling this urge to transcend in some way, to go beyond what you see to something unseen, which is more spiritual. If you feel a little bit of that nudge within yourself, then feed it, go with it, and that will help you and the world. Okay, I want to look at a few things that have happened already. And I want to go back to the March 25th lunar eclipse and the Baltimore bridge collapse, which happened the next day. Now, at the March 25th eclipse, the major aspects were not all that exact. It was in minor aspects of semi-squares and sesquiquadrates that things were pretty close. And we had transing Uranus making semi-square to the sun, sesquiquadrate to the moon. Uranus breaks up the existing pattern. Taurus is physical things. So one could expect something to break, either physically or people might feel agitated, restless in some way. Pluto in Aquarius was making a semi-square to Saturn and Venus and Neptune. And semi-squares and sesquiquadrats, they're like breaking points or turning points. They create a little tension here. Pluto is death and transformation. Saturn rules infrastructure, things that are solid. But Saturn is in Pisces, and Pisces rules water. So it's not all that surprising that somewhere, somehow, some infrastructure over water broke. But the question is always, why this place and why not some other place? Why did it happen in Baltimore rather than Australia? Well, to see those things, you have to try and find a chart for the location. There are a lot of people who just look at eclipses, see a potential for something bad, and then sure enough, something bad happens somewhere in the world, and then they say, see, this is the result of the eclipse. But you have to look at the chart of that person or the chart of that place to really see how things tie in. And when it comes for a place like Baltimore, uh, many towns have more than one possible chart you can use. There can be a chart set up for when people first settled in the area, a chart for when it became incorporated as a town, and then some places like Baltimore are first incorporated as a town and then later incorporated as a city. So I looked at several different charts for Baltimore to see if any of those would strongly resonate with the catastrophe of that bridge collapse. And this one, which I got at astro.com or Astro Databank, uh, it's for when Baltimore was incorporated as a town, and it very clearly shows the stresses. All the aspects here are using a 1-degree orb. And one thing you might notice, these aspects from transiting planets at the time of that bridge collapse, about 1:40 a.m. on March 26, 2024. None of these aspects are good aspects. You don't see any trines or sextiles in this chart. All you see are things like squares, oppositions, semi-squares, sesquiquadrates, and inconjuncts. And if we look at the specific planets, it's very clear what was going on. Uranus breaks up the existing pattern. Pluto, destruction. They're in opposition. Uranus is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. And let's see, a semi-square to the moon. This is a sudden breaking up of infrastructure, destruction, the people being affected. We also have Uranus making a strong square to Chiron, wounding. And then To add insult to injury, we have Chiron making a very strong square to Neptune. This is wounding. Neptune rules Pisces, which rules the seas. Neptune is in Cancer, which is a water sign. So again, we have water involved. And then up here, we have transing Pluto strongly conjunct natal Uranus. This is reiterating the message of transing Uranus. Opposite Pluto, sudden destruction, water, infrastructure, wounding. It's all very clear when we look at this chart that there was not a certainty, but a heightened risk of some sort of sudden tragedy or wounding to Baltimore on this day, particularly a tragedy where water would be involved in some form or fashion. Now, at this time, the sun was conjunct the moon. It was making a sesquiquadrant to Pluto, a sesquiquadrant to Chiron, and an opposition to natal Saturn. So this was one heck of a trigger point. It's the slower moving transits which tell you what the long-term tensions are going to be, but then it's usually a faster moving planet by this, like the sun, which becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. When one of these faster moving planets joins in with some difficult aspects, that becomes the breaking point, the turning point. So this Baltimore bridge collapse, it happened the day after that lunar eclipse, and it's tied to that and those very negative aspects that Baltimore experienced the day after the eclipse. Now let's take a look at the Middle East. This is the area I've been worried about ever since last October. Let me get a quick sip of water here. I got 4 charts here. They cover the solar and lunar eclipses back in October 2023, and then the March 25th, 2024 lunar eclipse, followed by the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. What I have shown in each chart are the outer planets, except for Saturn. Jupiter, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all shown. And if you look at these 4 charts, they all look very similar. The planets in spring of 2024, they're very close to where they were back in October of 2023. Only Saturn has moved on about 15 degrees. But because the planets are occupying such similar positions, this suggested that in spring of 2024, during this eclipse season, we would be either re-experiencing or revisiting the events of October 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel and this horrific war between Israel and Gaza began. So I saw there's a great danger that things could escalate. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So far, they have not spiraled out of control. But even if they don't escalate, I knew that this issue was going to come to the forefront again. It would be front and center at this time, most likely. Now, one good thing which has happened is even though Pluto has only moved about 4 degrees between then and now, it has changed signs. It's moved into Aquarius. So this is a shift from authoritarian power in the hands of individuals to the power shifting to the people and shifting to groups like NATO and the United Nations, alliances of nations, and people on the ground. So That is the background for what's happening right now. Let's look at how this eclipse is going or did affect some of the major players in the Middle East. If we look at Israel's chart, what's really interesting in the natal chart, interesting to me, is this opposition between Sun and Chiron. Now, whenever you have an opposition between two planets, you have two drives which are trying to integrate themselves. They're on opposite sides of the universe to begin with, but now they're trying to merge together and become one. And when you have the sun as the soul of the nation merging with this uh, higher transcendent urge to spirituality, represented by Chiron, this urge to go beyond the visible world, when these two things become integrated, then that is when Israel fulfills its ancient mission of being a light unto the nations. Now, I think that happens a lot in science, academics, and even the arts in Israel. That is where you see Israel being a light unto the nations. In politics in Israel, and in any nation for that matter, you rarely get the best of an aspect like this. So, at the political level, the level of government, rather than transcendence, it's been more wounding that has been experienced. Israel gets wounded, so they wound in return, which causes other people to wound Israel back, and then Israel wounds them back, and so on, back and forth the cycle goes. Now, at the time of the October 7th, 2023 invasion by Hamas, Uranus was very close to 23 degrees of Taurus, conjunction with the sun in Israel's chart. So the sun Chiron opposition was being stimulated at that time, and that led to the wounding of Israel, followed by the wounding in Gaza. And this spring, in this eclipse season, we have Uranus at 21 degrees Taurus, opposite Chiron at 21 degrees Scorpio. The Sun Chiron opposition is being stimulated again. So, again, wounding is going on. At the very least, this issue is being revisited. Uh, my greatest fear from looking at this and other charts for players in the Middle East, my greatest fear was that this would expand into a wider regional war. That is still possible, but so far, people are leaning toward higher expressions of this. So the whole issue of this wounding and suffering is being revisited. Um, but again, keeping my fingers crossed, so far things have not expanded into a larger war. At this time, Israel is doing a lot of wounding to not only Hamas, but ordinary citizens in Gaza, Israel itself. Its reputation around the world is being severely wounded as the world looks on at the suffering in Gaza. Though, as I keep saying, you can't talk about the suffering in Gaza without also talking about uh, the ongoing attacks by Hamas upon Israel. They go hand in hand, and you can't solve one problem without also solving the other. They both have to be addressed. Okay, now, Sun, Moon, and Chiron, exactly at 19 degrees 24 minutes of Aries. This is in opposition to the Jupiter Pluto midpoint in Israel's chart, And it's also very strongly square a lot of midpoints. Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Uranus, Pluto. So things are being felt on a very personal level, and a lot of very strong wounding is taking place within the region. Uh, Israel is both being wounded and wounding others at this moment. Now, if we look at Netanyahu, uh, this eclipse conjunction is very strongly opposite his moon at 19 degrees Libra. So this is affecting him very personally. And uh, there is a lot of criticism for Netanyahu, both around the world and within Israel. Polls show that the majority of Israelis favor fighting Hamas. That is understandable. You don't want them attacking your country again. You want to neutralize them once and for all. But at the same time, they're very, very unhappy with Netanyahu. And this eclipse conjunction is also opposite Netanyahu's Sun Mercury midpoint and his Venus Mars midpoint, all personal planets. So this is all affecting him very personally. And he also has transiting Saturn in opposition to his natal Saturn. So he is meeting the results of his past actions. He's having to confront his past karma, his past actions at this point. So we are seeing Netanyahu being wounded, at least politically, at this time. If we look at the chart for Hamas, uh, our eclipse conjunction is strongly conjunct its natal Jupiter. This is set up at noon for the day that Hamas was formed. We know the day it was formed, not the exact time. So we just use a noon chart. Uh, Nonetheless, Jupiter is not moving a lot that day. So this conjunction is very strong. That is going to impair Hamas's luck. We have Neptune, uh, transiting Neptune's square natal Chiron. Wounding is going to continue. And transiting Neptune is conjunct this natal lunar nodal axis. So that just intensifies things. It intensifies the wounding that's happening to Hamas. Unfortunately, because Hamas is so deeply embedded in uh, Palestinian society in Gaza, it's difficult to attack Hamas without simultaneously attacking civilians, particularly if you're using the dumb bombs rather than the smart bombs. If they were able to use or use solely these smart bombs where you can highly target a group or an individual, there would be far fewer casualties among ordinary Palestinians. Uh, and but for now, as Hamas gets wounded, all of Gaza tends to get wounded. Okay, and now if we look at Iran's chart and its transits at the time of the eclipse, there are a lot of tensions in this chart, but Iran is not a very open society these days. And so we don't always know everything that's going on inside Iran internally. But looking at this, the eclipse conjunction, it's directly opposite Pluto in Iran's natal chart. This chart is set up for the time when the Shah abdicated and the Ayatollah Khomeini took control of the country. Uh, there are a few other times that people use for charts for Iran, but this one seems to be the one that works best for me. And we see a lot of wounding for Iran. Its power is going to be wounded. This is also opposite the Venus Jupiter midpoint. So people and economic growth are being impacted. It's squaring the Mars Neptune midpoint. That can be volatile. Mars is aggression, Neptune is passion. So passions can be inflamed as a result of wounding. And of course, the recently, not too long ago, Israel, in its effort to kill some leaders of Hamas, they bombed an Iranian consulate in Syria. And that could draw Iran into this war and really escalate things. Now, Iran is smart enough to realize that a war with Israel could have more minuses than pluses. If they win, it could be a Pyrrhic victory. They could lose a lot during an all out war with Israel. So, fortunately, they're smart enough to realize that they want to avoid it. They said that they will retaliate uh, in response to Israel's attack on their consulate in Syria, uh, but they say they will do so in a way which won't escalate the war. And intelligence officials are expecting some sort of retaliation, maybe over the next couple of days, within the next 48 hours, but we'll see. But the good news is that Iran and some others are now uh, exercising restraint. They're responding to Saturn conjunct Mars so far in terms of restricting aggression. So there are two things which could lead to a much wider conflict, have the potential. Uh, Iran attacking Israel, which is done in a way which causes Israel to respond with even a bigger response and retaliation. That could cause things to spiral out of control. Or if Israel invades Rafah and causes a lot of civilian deaths, that could cause things to spiral out of control in a bad way. So far, Israel and Iran have restrained themselves somewhat, perhaps with urging from the United States, but we don't know if that lasts. If Israel does go into Rafah and without finding a way to minimize civilian casualties, it could result out and out regional war, larger war in the Middle East, or again, if we're lucky, uh, surrounding Arab states will band together, work with the United States and other countries to impose solutions upon this problem and get Israel to back off, Hamas to back off, and find some way to establish a government or authority in Gaza which does not involve Hamas. Okay, now other things we have going on in Iran's chart. Mars is in opposition to Saturn at the time of this eclipse. So, yeah, they want to retaliate. They're angry. Uh, Transiting Pluto is in opposition to natal Jupiter. That can be pretty harsh for their economy, for growth and expansion. And we have transiting Jupiter and Uranus, both in opposition to natal Uranus. Natal Uranus is in the seventh house, which can be other countries. So there are very tense, erratic, and chaotic relationships with other countries now. So in Iran's chart right now, there's a lot of tension. They're being directly impacted by the April 8th solar eclipse. They're feeling a lot of stresses, a lot of anger, a lot of aggression. a lot of urge to do something erratic. So far, they're keeping their cool. Let us hope they continue to do so. Oh, also, transiting Uranus at square the sun, just to make things worse. Sun in the 10th house, uh, leaders close to the cusp of the 11th house, associates. Uh, there is pressure for uh, Iran to do something erratic, which will break up the existing pattern. There may be both internal and external pressures to Iran. Let's just hope they keep their cool and that they don't escalate this war in the Middle East. Okay, here's some of the, let's see, recent headlines. Oh, I repeated one here because I forgot I put it up here. So uh, I'll skip over this one when I get to it. Israel bombs an Iranian consulate in Syria. World Food Kitchen convoy bombed in Gaza by Israel. Israel, as I told one of my friends, they're running out of feet to shoot themselves in. Biden to Netanyahu. U.S. Gaza policy to be based on Israel curbing civilian harm. Immediately after, within a few hours after this headline appeared, this one appeared. Israel to take immediate steps to increase aid to Gaza. Okay, now, in response to Israel bombing the Iranian consulate in Syria, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps warns Israel attacks won't go unanswered. On the positive side, we still have talks going on for releases of hostages and a potential ceasefire. Delegation headed by Mossad chief to head Cairo for hostage release talks. And Israel withdraws division from Gaza, leaving no troops actively maneuvering in southern Gaza. A lot of these positive benefits appear to be due to uh, actions taken by the United States. So I think the United States has been a positive influence on this current conflict in the Middle East. And as long as these divisions have been withdrawn from southern Gaza, it doesn't look like Israel will be in a position to enter into Rafah. So let's hope things hold. There are, of course, difficulties, always have been difficulties in negotiating with Hamas because Hamas doesn't want to compromise. They want the destruction of Israel. And they can be very brutal. Uh, they don't want to meet in the middle. They want what they want. And if they don't get it, then it's pretty much no deal. So it's been very difficult to do any sort of negotiation with Hamas, but they're going to continue to be wounded. And let's see, other things. Israel is using artificial intelligence to help pick bombing targets in Gaza. Again, the report says that this is being done without oversight. Computer picks a target, it gets bombed. That's very worrisome. Gaza truce talks still deadlocked. Netanyahu sets date for offensive. That's in Rafah. So he's withdrawn from the south, but he said that he set a date for invading Rafah in the south. Kind of a holding pattern. A released hostage said, because of Biden, I'm still alive. I think that's true. Biden and America have been a positive influence and have helped to make things better instead of worse in the Middle East. Secretary Blinken recently said, I should take out either the is or this, little grammatical error here. It is astounding to me that the world is silent when it comes to Hamas. And again, a lot of people, we don't like seeing civilians being killed. We don't like seeing women, children, and babies dying in this surf conflict. We don't like to see famine and people starving, but people often react to what they immediately see on the news, the images that they see. We have to keep in mind the role of Hamas in all of this. Hamas has this history of embedding itself in places like hospitals and other areas where there are lots of civilians. They tend to use other Palestinians as human shields. And that is why it's so difficult to take out Hamas without there being a lot of collateral damage. On the other hand, it seems like Israel has gone too far in terms of the collateral damage that's been caused. There's too much suffering uh, for the world to look at and remain silent. But we can't talk about one problem without the other. You can't solve the collateral damage, the killing of civilians, without finding a way to neutralize Hamas, neutralize its ability to be a threat to Israel. You have to talk about and solve both problems simultaneously. Okay, what else? Polls showed Netanyahu crashing to defeat in elections. Uh, People favor the war, but they don't favor Netanyahu. More recently, this headline, Israeli attacks kill 122 a day. Israeli army confirms assassinating Hamas's Haniyeh's three sons, alleges they were on way to terror attack. They killed the sons of one of the top leaders, if not the top leader of Hamas. And the bombs also killed some of his grandchildren. So, yes, as foreseen, Hamas is still being wounded a lot at this time. And Iraqi Islamic resistance targets Israel's oil port in Haifa. So, wounding to Israel, wounding to Netanyahu, wounding to Hamas, and we've seen wounding uh, to Iran so far in terms of the Iranian response and in terms of Israel invading Rafah. Both Israel and Iran are showing some restraint. Let's hope that holds so that uh, this conflict does not grow and spread further. Okay, now let's take a look at the British royal family. I think back as far as September, I was looking at things related to the April 8, 2024 solar eclipse, and I realized that King Charles III could be wounded because this eclipse occurs opposite his Mars-Pluto midpoint very strongly. And there's a lot of ways something like this could work out, but one of the interpretations could be wounding, Chiron, surgery, Mars, Cancer, Pluto. Wounding through surgery and cancer. And that has happened. The conjunction occurs in the 10th house of King Charles, so it affects his status, his position as king. Additionally, Pluto strongly square his moon. This can cause very dramatic transformations to his health, and with the moon on the 10th house, it also impacts his status as king, his ability to perform his job. Now, this square was exact on February 3rd, will be exact again on August 10th, and on December 9th of this year, 2024. So it's likely that this cancer diagnosis and treatment is going to be an issue for him for pretty much the entire year. Now, 2 days after Pluto was exactly square uh, the natal moon in the chart of King Charles, that is when the announcement was made that he has cancer. And on that date, Chiron was in opposition to his Venus Neptune midpoint and his Saturn Chiron midpoint. This latter one really relates to restrictions and wounding upon the king. And remember, Pluto square moon, that was exact just 2 days prior to February 5th. And so it's very, very strong at this point. Additionally, we got Sun in opposition to the moon here. And I'm sorry, in opposition to Pluto. Pluto's in his first house. This acts like a trigger, which is really setting things off, this transformation that he is having to go. And Pluto, transing Pluto, like I said, it's square his natal moon. It's also making a quincunx to his first house natal Pluto, causing adjustments, changes that have to be made in his life. Okay, so a lot of tensions, stresses going on the 5th when the cancer diagnosis was announced. And then we see these stresses on the 8th. Now, when it comes to eclipses and some other major celestial astrological events, things can happen both uh, before the astrological condition becomes exact and after it becomes exact. You have tensions building as we approach this eclipse and tensions continuing even after the eclipse. So it's not out of character or surprising that the cancer diagnosis came about, uh, let's see, a month or a couple of months before the actual solar eclipse. Now let's look at the chart for Kate Middleton, Princess Kate, Princess of Wales. I had not looked at her chart uh, earlier back in 2023, but when we look at this eclipse chart for April 8th, we see what's going on. The Sun Moon Chiron conjunction here, very strongly scoring her Sun and her Moon, and in opposition to her natal Saturn. So this is causing a lot of stress, a lot of wounding. Also, midpoints are being activated. This conjunction is opposite her Sun Moon midpoint. So whatever happens is affecting her very personally. It's also opposite her Mars Pluto midpoint. And notice that this conjunction was also opposite the Mars Pluto midpoint of King Charles. So in both instances, we have wounding, surgery, and cancer. And to make things worse, transiting Jupiter and Uranus are conjunct her natal Chiron, which is in the 10th house. She is being wounded. It's affecting her status also, her ability to carry out her royal duties. And it's making a square to her ascendant. So again, this is all affecting her very personally. Now, the good news is that I think that Kate is young and strong, and I believe I'm hoping that she has a good chance for recovery. The sense I get is that maybe they caught this early, and it's not too advanced, and that it's all treatable. And I certainly hope so. But the royal family, the British royal family, they're like one of the closed societies in the world. They don't like to put out a lot of personal information unless it's absolutely necessary. So they're kind of like Iran, Russia, and the Vatican in that regard. Now, I had also looked at the chart for the United Kingdom uh, last September to see how it would be impacted by the solar eclipse. We have the eclipse planets here making a square to very strong square to natal moon in the 10th house. This told me that there would probably be some sort of wounding of leaders within the United Kingdom. It could be a political leader like the prime minister, could be members of the royal family, uh, could be celebrities or billionaires or anyone who's influential enough to be a leader in the United Kingdom. And furthermore, the Sun Moon Chiron conjunction, it's making a square to the Pluto Chiron midpoint. So people with power would be more likely to be wounded at this time. Additionally, there's a strong opposition of transing Pluto to natal Jupiter, which is in the 10th house, which again refers back to leadership, some sort of transformation, even a death, God forbid, of someone in a leadership position. So when I saw this coupled with the chart for King Charles, I thought, well, there's a very, very, and even stronger chance now that King Charles will undergo some sort of wounding around the time of the solar eclipse, and that indeed has happened. And it's been worse than I realized because I had not looked at Kate Middleton's chart. But now we know that Princess Kate has also been very strongly wounded around the time of the solar eclipse. Okay, let's take a look at Russia and take a look at Putin's chart. Now, I always have to mention this caveat. There's some controversy regarding Putin's birth data, but I've seen this chart that most people use work quite well, and the birth data has been personally confirmed by Putin's webmaster. So I think this is a good chart. Now, what's going on at the eclipse? Well, transing Sun, Moon, and Chiron in the 6th house, which rules health, is opposite Saturn, Neptune, Mercury in the 12th house. 12th house, it can rule hidden enemies, self-undoing, things you want to keep hidden. The eclipse planets here, they're also strongly opposite Putin's Sun Mercury midpoint, Mercury Saturn midpoint, and the Saturn Neptune midpoint. Okay, so this is very personally affecting Putin. He could have health problems that there have been all sorts of rumors. There could actually be some serious health problems we haven't heard about, they're keeping under wraps. This could come back to the forefront. Hidden enemies, that could come to the forefront. Actions which undo him. We've definitely seen that. Uh, Not many people around the world like Vladimir Putin now or see him as a Russian moderate. They see him as sort of an old style Russian czar that wants to restore the homeland's former glory. What else do we have going on? Transiting Uranus and Jupiter or conjunct natal Jupiter and making a square to Pluto, the south node, and Putin's midheaven in the 10th house. So there are forces out there, certainly other countries, 7th house, but also probably within there are people who really want for there to be a change in Putin's status. And there is that pressure. Putin may be able to withstand it. His grip on power may be strong enough he can ride things out, but there are these pressures. Also, transing Neptune square natal Mars. Mars is in his 3rd house, has to do with his thoughts. Mars, aggression. Sagittarius, foreign lands. Neptune can be vision or delusion. Uh, Putin's delusional fantasies are causing him to be aggressive toward his neighbors. He's wounding others. He is wounding himself in ways, at least politically, in terms of how other people view him. There are forces rallying against him that want a change in his status. So, this is how Putin is being impacted by this solar eclipse. As for Russia, well, this eclipse conjunction, it's in the 10th house. So it's leadership that is being wounded, possibly. At its best, it would be leadership that becomes enlightened. I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing more wounding in Russia's case. It's also opposite his Venus Jupiter midpoint. So probably the people and the economy are being wounded in Russia. Transiting Saturn is in opposition to natal Jupiter in the second house. That is suggests that Russia's economy is being constricted. It's not growing well at this point. Transiting Pluto is conjunct the descendant opposite the ascendant. Pressure from foreign countries. Let's see, Uranus in the 10th house is opposite Pluto and Venus. Now, in Russia's chart, Pluto represents Putin because Putin has Scorpio rising, which is ruled by Pluto, and he has Pluto in his 10th house, conjunct the South Node, which is why he has become this old style Russian czarist kind of ruler or dictator. And there are people in Russia who want change. They want to change that. So there's that pressure there for change, but Putin's got a pretty firm grip on power. We'll just have to see what happens. He may hold on. But over the next few years, by 2026, all astrologers are expecting uh, Putin to be gone and for some new direction to emerge in Russia. And that is because Saturn and Neptune are moving toward a conjunction. And whenever they have come into conjunction in the past, there have been big changes for Russia. There's a conjunction 1917 when the Bolshevik Revolution occurred, a conjunction 1952 when Stalin died, and that's followed by the de-Stalinization of Russia. There was a conjunction 1989, which was interesting because Saturn rules structure, Neptune dissolves structures, and the Berlin Wall literally dissolved in front of our eyes. That structure dissolved in response to this conjunction 1989, and that was followed by the breakup of the Soviet Union. So Russia is having its economy restricted, people are being wounded at the time of this eclipse. Foreign countries are putting pressure on Russia, and there are people in leadership who want change in Russia. Now, as far as Ukraine goes, it's not being so directly impacted by the April 8th solar eclipse. That eclipse is occurring in the third house. I think in one of my previous videos, I unfortunately said fourth house because it looks like it's in the fourth house at first glance, but when you look at the number here, you see it's really in the third house. So that affects communication. And of course, we know that Ukraine has had problems communicating its message to several Republicans in the United States Congress, and aid for Ukraine that desperately needs has been held up. So, but it's not being directly impacted by the eclipse in terms of planetary aspects or aspects to midpoints. We do have transing Uranus making a strong square to the moon at this time. So things are perhaps even more chaotic in Ukraine right now. The lives of the people, their patterns are being broken up at this time. What is more serious to me is notice how Pluto is conjunct Saturn and in opposition to Chiron. It's stimulating the Saturn Chiron opposition that's in Ukraine's natal chart. And as you'll see on the next slide, this is going to be serious because this is going to last for about the next 3 years. Saturn is death and transformation. I'm sorry, Pluto is death and transformation. Saturn is structure. Chiron often manifests as wounding. Whether the war ends quickly or lingers on, there could be ongoing destruction and wounding for Ukraine over the next 3 years. Okay, let's look at this graphic ephemeris that covers the period from the start of 2022 through the end of 2026. And we can see that as this war uh, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in 2022, from 2022 up through early 2024, Chiron has been making a series of squares to planets in Aries. That represents the initial wounding. Uranus, throughout almost this entire period from 2022 through at least the first half of 2026, it's making a series of oppositions and squares to planets, uh, which means a lot of things are being broken up in the country. A lot of sudden events that are causing destruction and catastrophe. In 2022 up to beginning of 2024, we had Neptune in opposition to Mars. So conflict based upon ideology. In this case, I would say delusional fantasies that Ukraine has always been and always should be a part of Russia. That these beliefs, these fanatical beliefs, have led to war, invasion of Ukraine. And remember that Neptune square Mars, transing Neptune square natal Mars, that was prominent in Putin's chart. So we're seeing a bit of a resonance here in the transing Neptune opposite Mars in Ukraine's chart. This links Putin with Ukraine. Now, from 2024 through 2026, that Saturn Chiron opposition in Ukraine's natal chart is stimulated, and that most likely will result in a lot of destruction of infrastructure and a lot of wounding. In 2024, 2025, Pluto will make 5 exact conjunctions with natal Saturn. Destruction of infrastructure, most likely. That's followed by 3 oppositions of Pluto to Chiron. Quite likely a lot of transformative wounding. Now, as I said, it's possible things can happen. The war could end before then. It could continue after it. Nonetheless, one way or another during this period, there is probably going to be a lot more destruction and wounding going. If something happens which makes everything take a turn for the better, though, instead of wounding and destruction, we might get transformation of infrastructure, rebuilding. That would be really nice. Rather than wounding, we might get that sweeter spiritual transcendence of Ukraine. That would be nice. It would be nice if those things happen, but right now, What seems to be most probable is more destruction, more wounding, very unfortunately. But for 3 years, that Saturn Chiron opposition is going to be stimulated. So that is what Ukraine is going to have to deal with from now until the end of 2026. Let's hope we get the sweet side of things rather than the bad side. Right now, though, we're getting a lot of the bad side, unfortunately. Here's some of the headlines I've seen recently. With no way out of a worsening war, Zelensky's options look bad or worse. Russia's descending into the dark ages through normalizing violence. That was in the Moscow Times, an independent newspaper in Russia. Ukraine says situation difficult around Chasiv Yar in Ukraine. Okay. Russia evacuates almost 4,500 people after dam burst. Critical Russian floods threaten Urals, western Siberia, as waters recede from early epicenter. Russia's Orenburg region hit with worst flooding in decades. There's a lot of flooding going on in large parts of Russia right now. So, yeah, they're undergoing wounding through their own version of earth changes at this moment. And uh, headlines say Russia's descending into dark ages, and the war seems to be worsening for Ukraine and Zelensky. Okay, now let's take a look at Pope Francis, and then I think we'll take a look at America. If we look at the birth chart for Pope Francis, he has Sun in opposition to Chiron. Okay, and that's interesting. It's interesting because Israel's chart has that same opposition. We talked about this before. Uh, this opposition can result in wounding, but its purpose is that the soul of the person and this urge to transcend spiritually integrate with one another. And when they do, then that person can become, or that nation can become, a light unto the nations. And I think that has happened to a large extent in the case of Pope Francis. Now, I'm not a Catholic. I'm not even a Christian. Uh, and I don't agree with a lot of Pope Francis's policies, particularly when it comes to women and LGBTQ people, even though he's been more progressive in those areas probably than previous popes. But nonetheless, particularly policies regarding roles of women, abortion, and other things, I think should be their decisions. Pope Francis takes a different policy position on that I disagree with. In spite of the fact that I don't like everything he's done, I still see him as a very spiritual person, probably the most spiritual pope in my lifetime, even more so than Pope John Paul, who was also tended toward the side of good. Uh, in John Paul's case, and even more so, I think in Pope Francis, I see a kindness and a love in his heart uh, for people. So you can still have ideas, beliefs I disagree with. In spite of that, you may be making mistakes, but you're still can be a very spiritual person. And I think that is the case of Pope Francis. He has in many ways been a force for good and a light into the nations. Now, what's interesting here is that when Pope Francis was younger, uh, he worked as a chemist. I think he had the equivalent of a master's degree in chemistry, and he is working as a chemist. But when he is 21 years old, this Sun Chiron opposition was stimulated by transiting Saturn. And he became gravely ill. and with pneumonia. Had a very severe case of pneumonia, lots of cysts, and he had to have almost all of one lung removed. Interesting, Chiron is in Gemini, which rules the lungs. And it was following this illness that Pope Francis joined the Jesuits. He'd been leaning in that direction for a couple of years, but he joined the Jesuits after this severe illness. And then 10 years later, approximately, he was uh, ordained as a priest. Uh, and so this is the classic motif of the wounded healer who becomes the shaman. And that is in many ways the story of Pope Francis. He was severely wounded. And after that, he healed himself. He became the shaman. He turned towards spirituality, left his job as a chemist, and ultimately he became Pope. And even though, like I said, he does have positions that I strongly disagree with and that I think have hurt people, but nonetheless, I think he has also been a light unto the nations. And I hope and pray for his health, and that perhaps he changes some of his positions with regard to women. Okay, now let's see. This Sun Moon Chiron conjunction, it actually occurred in his ninth house. It looks like it's getting into the 10th, but there's just a lot of planets transiting through his ninth house right now. So this dotted line is where the 10th house begins in the chart for the transiting planets. These planets were in strong opposition to his natal Mars. So his physical body could be very wounded by this eclipse. And we know that the Pope he's 87 years old, he's in poor health. So even slight increases in tension and pressure could result in more illness or even death, unfortunately. Uh, this conjunction is also in opposition to his Mercury Pluto midpoint. So that could cause more wounding, more illness. It's square his moon, sun moon midpoint, so things are affecting him personally. We also have transiting Mars making a sesquiquadrate to his natal Pluto. Pluto's in the first house, so that affects him personally. Even more serious, we have transiting Pluto making a semi-square to Saturn in opposition to natal Pluto. Now, the good news is the opposition to natal Pluto, that is separating, it's waning in strength. But Pluto's going to turn retrograde before long. And it's going to come very close, not making exact opposition again, I believe, but it's close to it. So things this year could affect Pope Francis very personally, and the eclipse could affect him physically to quite an extent. Now, if we look at his hard transits for the year, there's some which really stand out. Transiting Pluto is going to be scoring his midheaven for most of the year. We're kind of in a lull right now in that regard, but after May, it starts to pick up again. It was exact on January 23rd, will be exact again on August 28th, November 23rd. Pluto's transformation, the midheaven has to do with your status, your position in society. So this creates pressure for transformation in the status of Pope Francis. Consequently, there is a heightened possibility that he may have to step down from the papacy sometime this year. Uh, as a result of old age and illness, he may have to uh, step down like his predecessor, Pope Benedict, did. And if he continues to survive, he may become Pope Emeritus. Now, we also have Chiron, uh, in exact opposition to Mars on April 10th, again on November 26th. So these are periods when wounding to the body could occur. Saturn making a sesquiquadrant to Pluto on March 29th, October 20th, December 11th. Let's see where Pluto is in this chart. Oh, yeah, it's in his first house, as I said. So, again, wounding that could affect him very personally, restrict his movements. Will be going through a Saturn opposition on April 29th and September 1st. More restrictions. Saturn opposition to Neptune on June 6th, July 23rd. Chance of infection, heightened risk there. So a lot of very strong stresses in this chart this year. He may have to resign from being Pope. On the good side, though, he also has some long-lasting good aspects. Neptune making a trine to his first house Pluto, that's an effect through most of the year, so that will help ameliorate things and relieve some of the tensions. Also, transing Chiron, sextile natal Chiron in April and May, exact on April 23rd. Strong again in October, November, exact on November 5th. This could bring healing to the Pope. And Uranus making a sextile to natal Pluto in the first house. That's doesn't get super strong, but will be in effect in August, September, most of October. That could also help him. So he's got a lot of tensions in his chart this year. Some strong beneficial aspects that will help him deal with those tensions. I wish him good health. I wish him survival. But there is a heightened chance that this may be his last year as Pope. But we'll just have to wait and see. Nothing is for certain. We only deal with weather reports and probabilities of what might happen when we're doing astrology. Human will, free will, modern medicine, these are also factors. And so we can never say exactly what will happen, only that there's a heightened risk for one thing or another. Now, if we look at America, this eclipse and this year are very consequential for America because Sun, Moon, and Chiron, they were at 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. America has Chiron at 20 degrees, 6 minutes of Aries. About half a degree away from this eclipse point. Now, the chart I use for America is the July 2nd, 1776 chart for the passage of the Resolution for Independence. But what I'm saying here, most of it applies to all the July 1776 charts. But one thing which applies to this one in particular is that this conjunction is also exactly conjunct the Sun-Pluto midpoint in America's chart. This means that people with power in America will be impacted by this eclipse. This could be the president, could be the Speaker of the House, could be the former president, could be any celebrity or billionaire that has a lot of power in America. They will could be wounded in some way, though if we're likely, they take the high road. Instead of being wounded, they could be spiritually enlightened. Now, we also have transing lunar nodal axis right now at this eclipse time in pretty strong conjunction with natal Saturn. So this intensifies some of the restrictive influences in America. At best, we will put forth good legislation, good laws and regulations. At worst, we will suffer the effects of bad laws, such as the 1864 uh, law of Arizona, back when it was just a territory, not a state, that restricts all abortions except for the sake of saving the life of a mother. Now, let's go back over here to the eclipse. Transing Chiron, at the time of the eclipse, it's very close to a conjunction with natal Chiron. We're going to have an exact conjunction, a Chiron return on April 20th, the same day as that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. We have another Chiron on November 9th, just days after the presidential election, and then a third Chiron conjunction on February 17th, 2025. Chiron is going to be very prominent in America this year, both as a result of these conjunctions and as a result of the eclipse. And this can be either wounding, healing, or spiritual transcendence. To some extent, our choice. Now, what we're about to go through, we've been through this before. Back in the early 70s, we had a series of 3 oppositions to natal Saturn from Chiron, followed by 3 Chiron returns. We went through a lot of wounding, primarily political wounding in this period. The political wounding we underwent was the result of Watergate, which was a tremendous wounding to the country. As a result of Watergate, President Nixon had to resign, and his vice president, Spiro Agnew, had resigned a few months earlier as a result of his own financial scandals. He was given a choice. Prosecutors told him either resign or we're going to take this to trial and you'll probably spend the rest of your life in prison. So we were wounded by Watergate, with the vice president and the president resigned during this period. However, we also saw spiritual transcendence occurring in the form of the Senate Select Committee to investigate Watergate. For those who were alive, who watched those televised hearings back in the early 70s, you know it was one of Congress's finer moments. It was a time when both Democrats and Republicans came together to do what was right for the country, to reestablish the order of law. And those of us who were alive then will never forget the eloquence of Representative Barbara Jordan. Now, also happening in this period was inflation. Inflation began to be rampant. It got into double digits. But in 1973, another thing that happened was the Supreme Court took up a case, Roe v. Wade, and they gave women the right to have control over their own bodies. They legalized abortion across the land at this time. So that was the landscape during the early 70s. Back now, from 2022 through 2025, we're going through the same sort of things. We're going through tremendous political wounding, this time due to the aftermath of the January 6, 2021 insurrection. Now, that happened right before this series of 3 oppositions of Chiron with Saturn back in January 6, 2021, there were other planetary aspects that showed the tensions present that day, uh, which led to a breaking point. But we're still dealing with the aftermath of that. And we're about to experience these three conjunctions of transient Chiron with natal Chiron. So we're also undergoing tremendous political wounding. A president, in this case, former President Trump, is involved in this whole scandal. We have instances of the transcendent aspects of Chiron additionally. Uh, this time it was the January 6th House Committee to investigate those events where Democrats and a few Republicans came together and worked not for their respective parties, but for the good of a nation to restore democracy and restore justice, law and justice in America. And once again, that was one of Congress's finer moments, that work at the January 6th committee, in my opinion. Now, we're also experiencing inflation, though it's not nearly as bad as it was in the early 70s. I think we've learned more how to keep it under control, but the solution brings about its own wounding to the people as interest rates go higher and it becomes harder for individuals to buy houses and other things. And then, guess what? In 2022, the Supreme Court revisited Roe v. Wade. And this time, instead of liberating women, it wounded them and the rest of the country. It overturned Roe v. Wade. And we're experiencing a lot of disastrous after effects state by state. So, the astrological aspects right now are repeating themselves, repeating what we saw in the early 70s. And events right now are in many ways a reflection of the events of the early 70s. Tremendous political wounding, a president disgraced, inflation, and Roe v. Wade coming back into the news. It really amazes me sometimes how well astrology works. Okay, here's some of the headlines I've seen. Trump posted a $170 million bond. There are some reports now that there may be problems with this bond that was posted. It doesn't conform to the laws in the state of New York. And so it may eventually wind up being rejected. And if that happens, then Trump's properties and assets will be seized, some of them, and will be sold off. A criminal trial of Donald Trump begins with jury selection on Monday, April 15th. I'm making this a video on Friday, April 12th, just shortly before this trial of Donald Trump begins. Trump lost a bid to delay the hush money trial, and there's a pending gag order appeal. Abortion-wise, Florida Supreme Court upheld a 6-week abortion ban. The Arizona Supreme Court has issued a near total ban on abortion. Within a week or so, I think this ban goes into effect, and abortion pretty much disappears from Arizona, except for cases where the life of the mother is in danger. No exceptions for rape or incest. And people who provide abortion, physicians who provide abortion, they will be sent to jail under this law. Even if you provide medications for abortion, you can be sent to jail. So once this ban goes into effect, I think that even the abortion pill will become available, unavailable in Arizona. And even though the state attorney general says she is not going to enforce this law, I don't think that is going to stop physicians, because I don't think any physician is, or very few indeed, will want to risk being sent to jail on the word of the Democratic state attorney general. He says that she won't enforce this ban. I don't think that's going to be good enough. I don't think that women in Arizona are going to be able to acquire the abortion pill through the mail. Through the mail, I don't think that's going to be available. Okay, earth changes we've seen. Well, there was that 4-point earthquake in New Jersey, which was very rare for that part of the country. And what's interesting to me is that trillions of cicadas are set to emerge in the US between Texas and the East Coast. In 1875, there was a similar solar eclipse where Sun, Moon, and Chiron were conjunct. They weren't an exact conjunction, but they were close. And in that year, trillions of locusts emerged and blanketed the Midwest. It's known as Albert Swarm. Now, I think locusts, they do a lot of damage to crops. That's not going to be done by cicadas. They tend to attach themselves to trees, but with trillions of cicadas uh, attaching themselves to trillions of trees, I'm not sure what damage that is going to cause, but there's certainly a similarity between these events following similar solar eclipses. Okay, let's take a quick look at Donald Trump. He has Sun, Moon, and Chiron. That conjunction occurs in his 8th house. That and the transing north node and south node, they're impacting this Jupiter Chiron conjunction in his 2nd house. I think this conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron, it's allowed Trump to use uh, the good side of Chiron, the sweet side of Chiron for evil. He is very good at sweet talking people for his own financial advantage. And his chart, his natal Neptune, it's at 5 degrees Libra. If you go back to that chart I used for America, it has 7 degrees Libra rising. He has been able to mesmerize millions of people. And that's why he can tell all these falsehoods, hypnotize others, get away with it, get elected president. But this conjunction is affecting his 8th house and 2nd house. That's his money and other people's money. It's affecting him financially a lot. And there are a few things I'm keeping an eye on. In the near future, transiting Uranus comes into conjunction with this midheaven. That can represent a sudden change in his status. And it's going to be squaring his natal Mars afterwards, which is conjunct his ascendant. This is going to tend to make him very angry and chaotic and affect him very personally. Transiting Saturn is going to be coming into a square with his 10th house Uranus, North Node, and his 10th house Sun. This is all going to restrict his status in society. And over here, I have a list of all the main outer planet hard aspects from Saturn on out for Trump from now through the rest of the year. And so you can see when he's going to have Saturn square natal Uranus exactly. You can see when Uranus is going to be exactly conjunct his midheaven, when Uranus is going to be exactly squaring his Mars. So he has a lot of difficulties this year. It looks like his legal difficulties are mounting up. A trial, criminal trial, is about to begin. Some others may get underway later this year, or new revelations may come out. And so I think things don't look rosy for Trump this year. Uh, he could become president again. I don't think he will. I think negative forces are going to intervene. And here's a graph which shows a lot of the major hard transits. Saturn square Uranus, that's going to be in effect in May and latter part of July and August. Uranus conjunctus midheaven, that's in effect for around mid-May through beyond mid-June, and around mid-November through the end of the year. Uranus square his Mars, that's going to be an impact from start of July through early November. So there's a lot of tensions in his chart, things that will probably change his status, things that will affect him personally, probably make him very angry. And let's go back here a second. Okay, now let's go forward. But he has a few good transits which will help. Uh, Chiron will be making a sextile to his sun throughout the summer. That can bring about some healing. He's going to have Jupiter trine natal Jupiter a couple of periods in August and in November. And that can help lessen some of the tensions. Jupiter conjunct Uranus in August and November, and that can also uh, help improve his status. Chiron trine the moon, April, May, and September, October, November. So he has a lot of stresses, but he has some good aspects also. And um, so that could help ameliorate things. Now, it put this Uranus conjunct midheaven in with the good aspects. The conjunctions tend to go in with the good aspects, but Uranus is so disruptive, this will probably act as a bad aspect during this period and this period. So, a lot of problems ahead for Donald Trump, but some good things too. So, we'll see if he hangs on and what happens. I didn't put Biden's chart in here. Biden he's kind of a master at turning astrological lemons into lemonade. He went through a lot of adversity early on in life with the death of his wife and a child. He's learned how to deal with tough times and get the best out of them. He will be having Pluto squaring his moon in effect for most of this year. That could cause health problems. It could even result in death, given that he's in his 80s now. But like I said, Biden has a strong history of turning astrological lemons into lemonade. So I'm not counting him out. I'm hoping for a positive outcome rather than a negative outcome in his case. And I suspect that he will win re-election as president. And I certainly hope so because there are a few problems that haven't been solved, such as immigration. He gets the bulk of the blame for that, but a lot of blame rests with the Republicans. They have not changed laws that he wants changed. They have not given him funding he wants to confront the problem. And more recently, when he was ready to sign a bill that actually did a lot of the things that the conservatives wanted to get done on immigration, is pretty much giving the conservatives almost everything they wanted to combat the problems at the southern border. And it was Donald Trump who told Republicans, don't for this, vote for this bill because it will, we want to use immigration against Biden for this election. And so the Republicans killed the bill. So ultimately, I think a lot of our inability to solve the immigration problem rests with Republicans who chose their own political futures over what's best for the country. So remember, it was Donald Trump who told the Republicans to kill that bill. But Biden has had lots of success domestically and in foreign policy. We're still suffering from effects of the pandemic, the effects of COVID. We still have inflation higher than we want it to be, and consequently, interest rates higher than we want it to be. But overall, the economy is strong and is much better in America than it is in other countries. A lot of that is due to Biden's policies to help the middle class grow. And Biden has done a lot uh, to restore NATO as an effective alliance. And he has done a lot to curb Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And he has done a lot more recently to help make the situation in the Middle East much more stable than it would have been if we hadn't engaged actively in diplomacy there and moved our aircraft carriers into the region to deter other countries from getting involved in warlike and aggressive ways. Still a lot of tensions and things to deal with in this world, but I think the Biden administration has been very effective in a lot of ways and made the world better. So I'm personally hoping that Biden wins and that we do not have a second presidency with Donald Trump, which I think would be disastrous for the nation and the world. So lots of things I'm keeping my fingers crossed on. Okay, and that is it for this presentation. So let me stop sharing in just a moment here. And I'm back. So this is a year of Chiron for the world. And that can be either wounding, healing, or spiritual transcendence. With Pluto in Aquarius, I think that has helped tilt things more toward the healing and transcendent side. So people are focusing more on humanitarian concerns now and trying to heal the world in their respective nations. This is the year in which people should choose spirituality and transcendence rather than personal power and wounding. This is a year where we should all give more to charity and to local food banks and to the World Food Kitchen. This is a year in which we should try and heal one another and end suffering. And there are many places, countries, and people that I've highlighted in this video that are impacted by that solar eclipse. And there are going to be aftershocks to that eclipse that involve Chiron. And Chiron is going to stay at the midpoint between uh, some planets in Aries and planets in Pluto for quite a while. And America is going to go through 3 Chiron returns. So these are all situations that can bring about wounding, but these are also all opportunities to evolve spiritually on a personal level and to be a light unto the nations on both a personal and collective level. So I urge everyone to choose peace over war, healing over wounding, spiritual over the material, joyful transcendence over personal suffering, if you can avoid that. I urge everyone to give to others, to give to charities, your local food banks, international food services like the World Food Kitchen. And I urge everyone to find that sweet light of transcendence and joy and spirituality in your own life. And if we can, this will be a very pivotal year in which we choose to pursue better directions rather than directions that will just cause only increased wounding and increased suffering. So that's it for now. That's the end of this presentation. And please make the best choices you can for yourself and for your people this year. And I hope you join me again in the future. But for now, I'll just say so long and be well. And be kind to yourself and to others. So long.